Juliana, the Venezuelan Vixen Pena, has had the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, as well as some legal issues sprinkled in there for good measure. Pena has won multiple awards in her career, such as Performance of the Night 2 times, the UFC Honors 2021 Performance of the Year, as well as 2021 Upset of the Year. But before we break down her long and decorated career, we will dive into her upbringing and background. Like and subscribe. Juliana was born August 19th, 1989, being raised by her parents Pamela Pena and Ernie Pena in the big city of Spokane, Washington. She is the youngest of 4 siblings, and her older sister was a meteorologist for the local news, KREM 2. She was an aggressive child as well as an overweight one at that. Pena would go on to graduate at Spokane Community College, so when she was 19, her sisters would encourage her to try out cardio kickboxing, not only to lose a few lbs, but get out some of her aggression. She would use the skills she gathered from the class to enter into the growing sport of MMA, and in 2009, she would have 3 amateur fights, winning the first against Kate Bell by decision on February 5th. Her second amateur fight was against Cynthia Hernandez on February 28th, winning by knockout in the very first round. Then her final amateur fight would be for an amateur title, taking place on May 9th, 2009. Her opponent would be Raylene Harvey. She would end up winning by submission just 2 minutes into the first round. After winning her amateur belt and getting a lot of confidence, she would turn pro later that same year in the Promotion International Fighting Championships, also known as the IFC, therefore making her pro debut on August 15th, 2009 against Robin Doon. This would be one of many dominant performances from Juliana Pena, because in the first round, she would knock out her opponent. Pena would waste no time to fight again, making her second walk into the cage on December 5th, 2009 against Stephanie Weber. Fun fact, Weber was scheduled to fight Fallon Fox in 2012. If you know, you know. Now, back to your regularly scheduled program. Pena would sink in an armbar 2 minutes into the second round and get the submission win over Weber. She would take 2010 off to focus on improving her skills, more specifically her wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Pena would make her return on December 15th, 2011, when she would face off with Rachel Swartz. This would be nothing less of domination, because in the second round, Pena would sink in a guillotine choke and get her 3rd win in a row, all of them ending in a finish. But some unfortunate event would take place when Pena was driving home from the gym. She would be hit head-on by a drunk driver, breaking her nose as well as knocking her unconscious from the accident. This happened in February 2012. Pena would fight again in April of 2012, this time facing off with future UFC fighter Sarah Moraes, just 2 months later after the accident. This would turn out to be a much more competitive fight than all of her previous fights, but in the second round she would not tap to a very deep armbar, and it was obvious that her arm sustained severe damage that forced the doctor to stop the fight, making this not only her first loss, but a TKO loss as well. Pena was in a rough spot after taking the loss. She was supposed to fight Claudia Gadelha in October of 2012, but the event would be cancelled, so she would take the rest of 2012 off, not only to recover, but further improve her game. She would make her eventual return on February 8th, 2013, when she would face off with another future UFC fighter, Deanna Bennett. This would be a very hard fight that tested both women, and it would end up going to the judges, and Juliana Pena would not get the nod, losing by unanimous decision. Things were looking bleak, taking her second loss in a row, but Pena would get the attention of the UFC due to her finishes and her personality, and they would give her a huge opportunity because it would be the first season that would be coached by 2 women superstar, Ronda Rousey and another well-known fighter, Miesha Tate. Pena was the first pick for Miesha Tate, which speaks to the potential that the coach saw in her, especially considering she had lost her last 2 fights. The season had a few great WMMA fighters, such as current champion Raquel Pennington and UFC veteran Roxanne Modafferi. Pena would shine on the show, beating Gina Mazzani in the first fight by unanimous decision. She would win her next fight by rear naked choke against Shayna Dazier, and redeeming her loss against Sarah Moraes by sinking in a guillotine choke. After clearing out the tough house, she would go to the finals and fight fight for the $100,000 contract. The other finalist would be a decorated boxer, Jessica Raki. Many felt like Pena would get knocked out due to the good boxing of Jessica, but once the ref said fight, it was the opposite. Juliana would outbox her opponent as well as dominate her in the clinch that would lead to a takedown. Juliana would then land brutal ground and pound that forced the ref to step in and stop the fight. All of this happened in the very first round. Juliana had won the six-figure contract and got to learn from one of the best pioneers of WMMA, that being Miesha Tate. After clearing out the tough competition and bringing home the contract, she would be scheduled to fight Jessica Andrade in March of 2014, but it would get canceled due to Pena wanting to train more. Her coach did not want her to continue to train, but she had snuck into wrestling practice and then ended up tearing her ACL, MCL, and LCL, as well as meniscus and hamstring. So basically just destroying her leg, according to ESPN, leaving Pena out of service for a year. Eventually, she would fully recover and get back into action, making that well-known walk she has come to love on April 4th, 2015, when she would fight Melinda Dueva. Pena would run through her opponent, taking her down and raining brutal ground and pound that would force the ref to step in and stop the fight, getting the TKO win just 3 minutes into the first round, as well as being awarded a $50,000 performance bonus. After getting the first round TKO in her first official fight in the UFC that wasn't tied to the Ultimate Fighter, she would take her next fight just a few months later in October when she would fight Jessica Ai. This wouldn't be nearly as easy of a fight for Pena. It would turn into a back and forth scrap that had Pena winning the majority of the exchanges. When the fight was over, it was clear Pena had done more than enough to get the unanimous decision. After this fight in December, Pena would go to the bar with her training partners. Well, Josh Gao was one of her training partners. And this is a quote about the situation. Pena, identified in the report as Juliana Nicole Pena, told Officer Eric Kahnberg she had been in a fight involving 20 people outside of the Globe Bar kitchen. She and Gao had been injured. She said she went to a bar nearby Zola's, where she said she knew the owner. An employee of Zola's told one officer, "Everyone in the bar knows Pena is a UFC fighter." The employee said the fighters attempted to enter the bar after it was closed. They were told by the bartenders and bouncers they couldn't use the restroom because it had just been cleaned. According to multiple witness statements, Pena became enraged and lunged at one employee who shoved her toward the door. Pena allegedly kicked 2 employees in the groin, one of them twice, as they tussled with her and Gao. It took several people to control the UFC fighter before she and Gao were shoved out of the bar. In the confusion, the allegedly assaulted employee reported the fighters took his cell phone. Pena was later searched and officers found 3 cell phones in her purse, though the employees did not wish to pursue charges. Police, however, took Pena into custody for allegedly assaulting 2 subjects at the bar, end quote. With the condition that Pena would not get into any other incidents for a year, the charges would be dropped. It wasn't a good look for Pena, but considering she had gone without further incident for almost a decade at this point, I personally wouldn't hold this against her. Now that we have the legal issues out of the way, let's get back on track. Pena would take her next fight against another big name who had just fought Ronda Rousey and lost, Kat Zingano, on July 9th, 2016, and Pena would shine bright once again because she would outclass the former contender, winning this fight by unanimous decision. After getting a huge win over a tough opponent, Juliana would get another huge opportunity to take on one of the best WMMA fighters of all time, Valentina "The Bullet" Shevchenko. In January of 2017, she would make that walk for a shot to be one of the few fighters to beat the Bullet. Unfortunately, she would be one of many to fall short of getting that win, because in the second round, she would get caught in an armbar and forced to tap. This was a rough loss for Pena, because even back then, she always felt like she was the best fighter. After taking the loss, Pena would add a pint-sized addition to her family, giving birth to her daughter in January of 2018. Pena would take the rest of 2018 off to not only recover from giving birth, but she would want to take care of her baby until she was at least 1 year old. Pena would make a return on July 13th, 2019, facing off with the first women's flyweight champion, Miko Manano. This was a huge shot for Pena to be a former champion, and Pena would not disappoint. The first round was not going Pena's way, getting beat in the clinch game, but making it to round 2. But in round 2, Pena would land more more punches than Nico, as well as out-wrestling Nico by getting into more dominant positions, and in the third round would be more dominant for Pena, winning rounds 2 and 3, and without a question, she had won the fight by unanimous decision. After getting back into the win column, Pena would be scheduled to fight up-and-coming prospect Aspen Ladd on March 28, 2020, but this fight would be cancelled due to Pena getting injured, so she would recover and sign up to fight another former champion, Germaine de Randamie, on October 3, 2020. But unlike Pena's last fight, it would not go as smoothly, as de Randamie was a world champion in Muay Thai. She was way better on the feet than Pena, which led to Pena being somewhat sloppy on the ground, trying to sink in Hail Mary submissions, which would turn out to be null, as de Randamie would seize the opportunity in the third round and sink in a guillotine choke and get the finish, making this Pena's second loss in the UFC. Pena was once again in a tough spot, getting finished by submission in both of her losses in the promotion, but she still felt like she was the best. She just needed to be more patient and learn how to effectively strike with another great striker. She would be scheduled to fight Sarah McMahon on January 23, 2021 on the prelims of the Poirier vs. McGregor rematch, as McGregor cards always draw more eyes from casual fans, and she would not let this opportunity go to waste because she would put on a dominant performance, therefore sealing the deal in the third round by sinking in a rear naked choke. This would garner some fans, but it wasn't big enough to make her a star overnight, so she would be scheduled to fight Holly Holm on May 8, 2021. Unfortunately, Holm would get injured and the fight would get cancelled, so Pena would get the opportunity of a lifetime, with her getting set up to fight the greatest WMMA athlete of all time, Amanda Nunes, on August 7, 2021, but this would get cancelled due to Nunes getting sick with the illness that ends in 19. So the fight would get rescheduled to December 11, 2021 due to Pena talking a ton of trash and claiming she will beat Amanda, which was big talk considering Pena would be a plus 700 underdog once the fight would take place. This fight did nothing but shock the entire UFC fan base. Pena would not only end up beating Amanda, but she would outstrike her on the feet, as well as taking her down and sinking in a rear naked choke just 3 minutes into the second round, shocking the world and proving all of the doubters wrong and becoming one of the biggest names in WMMA overnight. To make the night even sweeter, she would get all of those awards that we mentioned in the beginning of the video. The biggest 2021 upset and the UFC honors Performance of the Year of 2021, which is pretty crazy considering a lot of people didn't know who she was before this fight took place. After finally achieving her dream and proving to the world that she was indeed as good as she always claimed that she was, she would be riding high with interviews, and she would gain 300,000 followers on Instagram in one night. While not every follower will buy her pay-per-views, it is a good tell that she made a huge impression on the UFC fans, and there would undoubtedly be much more eyes on her next fight. With Nunes being a dominant champion, the automatic rematch would take place on July 30th, 2022. As all of you watching are aware, where there is a peak, there is a valley not too far ahead, and the rematch would be the valley for Pena, because once the ref said fight, Nunes had countered Pena time after time, and Pena would get bested on the ground by Nunes. But Pena did hang in there and kept trying to get the win, but it would turn out to be all for nothing because Pena would lose by unanimous decision. After losing the belt she had fought so hard for, she would take the rest of the year off to spend with her baby and husband. With Pena becoming a star and no other contenders who earned a title shot, the UFC would rebook the fight for a third time. They were set to fight on June 10th, 2023, but Pena withdrew to the fight due to her breaking her ribs in training camp. And that brings us to this weekend. Pena has another shot at the belt, fighting Raquel Pennington, former roommates of the Ultimate Fighter house, but they did not get along due to Pennington saying out of everyone in the Tough House, she would be most likely to beat up Pena, which hurt Pena's feelings because she would say, "Why me, Raquel? I put you in my high heels, I did your makeup so beautiful, I gave you my dresses, and taught you how to walk like a lady, and now you're going to kick me out of the house? For what? This is BS. And she said it was because I was too loud, and I said, I'm just going to practice, dude. Like I don't even know what you're talking about. So anyways, she wasn't able to get past Jessica Ratchey, and that was somebody that I dominated and that I finished. And so, like I said, we've had this brewing for a long time now. I hope you enjoyed my Pena impression. So it goes without saying, this is a grudge match. I will give you my prediction, but first, we must break down Pena's numbers. Pena has 10 wins with 5 losses. She has 3 TKO wins in the first round, 3 submissions in the second round, and 1 in the third. She has 3 decision wins. She has been TKO'd 1 time in the second round due to the doctor stoppage. She has been submitted 2 times, once in the second round and once in the third round, as well as losing 2 decisions. Now for my prediction. Pennington has good boxing, but she isn't good at stuffing takedowns, more specifically the single leg takedown, as she has a habit of going for a guillotine to stuff a double leg, which is a good submission, but bad for stopping single leg takedowns. And Pena's jiu-jitsu is the most polished part of her game, so I doubt a guillotine will get her out of the fight like it did earlier in her career. And when Pena is on top, she does a great job at keeping great positions, so if she can find a submission or even grind out Pennington's cardio, I could easily see Pena beating Covington by unanimous decision. If you watched the video this far, be sure to like and subscribe, as it is the only way to support the channel. I hope you guys have a great week and enjoy the fights this weekend. Bye!